An immense power exists within you. A silent friend that guides your every step without you even realizing it, your subconscious. Inspired by the ideals of Joseph Murphy, this audio aims to illuminate that power by showing you how your deepest thoughts and beliefs are the true creators of your reality. Although this work is not original in its essence, it has been carefully structured to offer you a clearer and more practical understanding of how you can transform your life. Your subconscious is the most faithful ally you have, waiting to be awakened to help you achieve your dreams and goals. This audio is an invitation to know yourself from within, to discover that what you think and feel has the power to change your world. Wake up that inner friend and allow it to guide you towards a full and abundant life. Your friend, the subconscious. The ideals of Joseph Murphy. The hidden power within you. Sometimes we walk through life without realizing the strength we carry within. It's strange how we let ourselves be carried away by external circumstances, by the winds that blow from the outside, believing that we are leaves dragged by the storm, when, in reality, a deep, unbreakable root exists within us. I've lived it. I've been through those days where everything seems to be falling apart, and I've found myself asking, where will I get the strength now? A few years ago, I faced one of the most difficult stages of my life. Everything I had built with so much effort seemed to be crumbling. In those moments, fear and uncertainty become constant companions, and that's when you feel most alone. Has that happened to you? Do you look in the mirror and ask yourself, who am I really? It was on one of those dark days, while walking on a lonely beach, that I realized something that changed my life forever. The wind was hitting my face with such force that it made me squint, but instead of giving up and seeking shelter, I stopped. I closed my eyes, not to escape the wind, but to listen to myself. Inside me there was a silence, a deep place that I had ignored until then. How could I have missed it for so long? That internal voice didn't shout or demand to be heard. It was soft, almost like a whisper, that nevertheless had the power to calm the entire storm. In that instant, I understood that the power was not in external circumstances, but in my ability to connect with that inner space where the strength that guides us resides. Have you ever listened to yourself? It's easy to get lost in the noise of the world. We are taught from a young age to look outside, to seek approval, success, and happiness in the eyes of others, but they never teach us to look inside. They never tell us that everything we need is already within us. Why is it so hard for us to believe it? As I walked along that beach, I remembered moments from my childhood. My mother used to tell me, "Don't worry about what you can't control. Take care of what you can, your thoughts, your emotions, your..." But of course, back then I was just a child. Who would have imagined that those simple words held such a powerful truth? Over time, I understood that the greatest strength we have is our mind. It's that inner voice that tells you to keep going, even when everything seems lost. But that voice doesn't just appear out of nowhere. The truth is that it has always been there, waiting for you to pay attention, waiting for you to stop and listen to yourself. What if you started paying attention today? Over the years, I have discovered that every challenge we face is nothing more than an opportunity to discover that hidden power within us. Have you realized how many times you have gotten back up when you thought you couldn't go on anymore? It's not a coincidence. Every time you fall and get back up, you are activating a force that many people don't know about, a force that comes from the subconscious, from that space where miracles are created. I like to think that life is like a river. Sometimes the waters are calm, and other times they are fast and turbulent. But if you stop to observe, you will realize that deep down, below the agitated surface, the river always flows calmly. That's how we are. Although everything outside seems chaotic, a space of serenity exists within you that you can access at any time. Do you dare to immerse yourself in that place? And this is where everything changes. When you start to understand that you control more than you thought, when you realize that the power is not in what happens to you, but in how you respond to it, then you begin to live from a different place. You are no longer a leaf in the wind. You are now the wind. What would your life be like if you started to believe in that power that has always been within you? Change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, a dance between the external world and your inner world. But every step you take inward, every time you listen to yourself, every time you decide not to give up, you are strengthening that connection with your deepest self. And believe me, when you learn to listen to that inner voice, when you trust it, you realize that no obstacle is too big and no storm is too strong. Are you ready to discover the power you carry within? The hidden power within you is not something you have to create, because it already exists. You just have to allow yourself to feel it, to trust it, and then life itself will begin to transform. What if today, right now, you decide to trust that power that has always been within you? The power of repetitive thoughts. There are times when we don't understand why life seems to take us in a direction we don't want. Have you ever wondered why you find yourself repeating the same patterns? I did too. For years, I found myself trapped in a cycle that seemed to have no end. I kept asking myself, why do I always end up in the same place? I remember one particular afternoon, one of those where the day passes slowly and thoughts seem heavier than usual. I sat in front of the window, watching as the sun vanished on the horizon. It was a moment of stillness, but inside me, the storm of thoughts wouldn't stop. Why do I feel this way? Why, despite everything I try to change, do I keep making the same mistakes? That afternoon, something hit me like a flash of lightning in the middle of the storm. I realized that the thoughts I repeated to myself day after day were the ones that shaped my reality. How many times have you repeated the same story to yourself? A story of limitations, of fears, of doubts. I did it for a long time. And without realizing it, every thought that was repeated in my mind was becoming my truth. Is it possible for our thoughts to be so powerful? They are. Every time you repeat to yourself that you can't, that you're not enough, that the path is too difficult, you are creating a kind of negative mantra, a mantra that, even if you don't see it, is anchoring itself in the deepest part of your subconscious, shaping every action, every decision, every step you take. Do you realize the magnitude of this? Your thoughts are not just words in the wind. They are seeds that, over time, take root in your being. For a long time, I repeated thoughts of fear and failure without realizing that I was conditioning myself to live a limited reality. Has it happened to you to say, I'm never going to achieve it? This isn't for me. I'm not good enough? And when those thoughts become so habitual, they end up becoming a part of us, as if they were an absolute truth. But they are not. I started to realize that if I wanted to change my life, I first had to change my internal conversation. So I made a promise to myself. Every time a negative thought came to my mind, I would replace it with a positive one. It sounds simple, right? But it's really not. The mind has a habit of clinging to what it knows, to what it has repeated for years. However, with time and patience, I learned to silence those thoughts that limited me and to make room for those that empower me. It's incredible how something as simple as a change in your internal dialogue can transform your life. I remember one particular day when I woke up and instead of saying to myself, "Today will be a difficult day," I decided to start with, "Today will be a day full of possibilities." It may seem like a small, almost insignificant change, but believe me, that decision made all the difference in how I lived my day. Can you imagine the power of changing just one thought? Repetitive thoughts are like drops of water that over time can erode even the hardest stone. If you let your negative thoughts repeat themselves over and over again, they will eventually create barriers that will prevent you from moving forward. But if you instead decide to feed your mind with thoughts of possibility, of hope, of self-love, then you will be building bridges towards a different future. What thoughts do you choose to repeat today? It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that what happens in our mind doesn't have a real impact, but I assure you that everything you think, everything you repeat to yourself, is creating your reality at this very moment. Have you ever stopped to listen to the conversation you have with yourself? I invite you to do so. Observe how many times you say words to yourself that don't help you, that don't push you forward. And when you do, don't judge yourself, just decide to change the narrative. A few months ago, a close friend called me. She was going through one of those stages where everything seems to be going wrong. She said, "I don't understand why I always find myself in this situation. No matter what I do, I always come back to the same place." I asked her, "What do you repeat to yourself every day?" And after a moment of silence, she replied, "That I'm not good enough, that I'll never be able to change." In that instant, I saw clearly what was happening to her. She wasn't trapped in her circumstances. She was trapped in her thoughts. How many times do we repeat to ourselves that we can't? And every time we do, we convince ourselves a little more of that lie. What she didn't know, and what many of us don't know, is that we can choose our thoughts. We can change that internal dialogue. Have you realized that you can choose what to think? How the subconscious shapes your destiny. Throughout my life, there was always a question that lingered in my mind. Are we truly the creators of our destiny? It's a question that, when you think about it in depth, confronts you. Because if the answer is yes, then what has been shaping my life until now? I remember one particular day when, after a series of events that seemed beyond my control, I sat on my living room couch. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It was that kind of exhaustion that leads you to ask deeper questions, questions that at other times you might have ignored. Why is my life like this? Why am I in these circumstances? And as those questions swirled in my mind, something within me whispered an uncomfortable truth. What you are living now is not the product of chance. It is the result of what you have sown in your subconscious. That idea hit me with unexpected force. How is that possible? I had never stopped to think about the magnitude of the subconscious mind's power, but that day something clicked. I understood that our subconscious is like a garden, and everything we plant in it, consciously or unconsciously, will grow. Have you realized what seeds you have been planting in your life? When we are little, our minds are sponges. They absorb everything they hear, see, and feel. Without us realizing it, those experiences begin to form beliefs, and those beliefs, in turn, shape our reality. How many times have you wondered why certain patterns repeat themselves in your life? The answer is often in the beliefs that were engraved in the deepest part of our subconscious. I, too, was trapped in that cycle for years. I told myself stories that I didn't even know I was telling myself. I'm not good enough. Success is not for me. There will always be someone better than me. And the curious thing is that even though those words didn't come out of my mouth consciously, they were there, hidden in my subconscious, directing every one of my decisions, every one of my steps, until one day I decided to change the narrative. I decided that if my subconscious had so much power, then I could learn to sow new seeds, new beliefs. And that's when I started to notice how my destiny was slowly changing, as if the entire world was responding to that new version of me that I was creating. Have you stopped to think about what stories you tell yourself every day? Sometimes the words we repeat without realizing it become the invisible walls that limit our growth. But the beautiful thing about this is that once you recognize that pattern, you can change it. What would happen if you started telling yourself a new story? The first time I heard about the power of the subconscious, it seemed abstract, almost like a mystical concept. How is it possible that something so intangible can shape something as concrete as our destiny? But over time, I started to see How the small decisions we make every day, influenced by those subconscious beliefs, lead us to destinies that we sometimes don't choose consciously. Think about it. How many times have you stopped trying something out of fear of failure even before you've tried it? That decision, although seemingly insignificant, was shaped by a hidden belief in your subconscious. Maybe at some point in your life, you heard someone say that you weren't capable enough, and that seed was planted without you realizing it. Now, every time you face a new challenge, that belief emerges, blocking you without your knowledge. But here's the powerful part. You can change those beliefs. The subconscious is not a fixed terrain. It is malleable. And just as a garden can be transformed with new seeds, your life can also be transformed with new thoughts, with new beliefs. What seed do you want to plant today? Transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's not about repeating empty affirmations in front of the mirror. It's about doing conscious work to observe your thoughts and emotions and ask yourself, where does this come from? When you start to question the beliefs that have been directing your life, it's as if you turn on a light in the darkness, and little by little that light guides you towards a new destiny. I remember a conversation with a friend. One of those friends who always seems to succeed at everything he does. One day, I asked him, "How do you do it?" His answer was simple but profound. "It's not what I do. It's what I believe about myself." And there was the key. It wasn't about his skills or his opportunities. It was about what he believed inside, what his subconscious told him about who he was and what he deserved. What beliefs do you have about yourself? That's the question that will change your life. Because if you start to identify the beliefs that limit you, you can begin to replace them with beliefs that empower you and push you forward. And when that happens, your subconscious begins to work in your favor, aligning every step you take with the destiny you truly desire. Today, I want to invite you to stop for a moment and observe your thoughts, not with judgment, but with curiosity. What stories have you been telling yourself? And when you do, ask yourself, how have those stories shaped my destiny so far? You may discover that some of those beliefs no longer serve you, and that's okay, because from today on, you have the power to write a new story. Your subconscious is like a treasure chest full of possibilities. What you put in it, what you believe, what you visualize, what you feel, will be what you see manifested in your life. What destiny do you want to create for yourself? The magic of beliefs and self-control. A few years ago, when I began to explore the power of the subconscious, I realized something that transformed the way I see life. Do you know what the most powerful magic we possess is? It's a magic that we all carry within, but very few of us learn to use it. The magic of our beliefs. That truth hit me when, after facing several failures, I asked myself, what is really stopping me from moving forward? It wasn't the lack of opportunities or external circumstances. It was what I believed about myself. Have you stopped to think about what you believe about yourself? Our beliefs shape our reality, and the moment we understand this, we begin to realize that we are the ones holding the magic wand that can shape our life. I remember one particular day. I had been working on a project that didn't seem to be moving forward. Every step I took seemed to be more difficult than the last, and inside I felt that feeling of imminent failure. Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you try, everything seems to go wrong? I sat alone in my room, frustrated and exhausted, and then I asked myself a question that changed everything. What do I really believe about myself right now? What I discovered was shocking. Deep down, I believed that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't have what it took to succeed. And those beliefs, even though I had never said them out loud, were directing every one of my movements. How many times do our hidden beliefs sabotage us without us knowing it? The power of our beliefs lies in the fact that they are like maps. They guide us and show us the way. But if the map is wrong, how can we expect to reach our destination? My beliefs were drawing a map full of limitations, but the most beautiful thing about this is that just as you can change a wrong map, you can also change your beliefs. What beliefs have been guiding your life? I started to work on myself, to observe every thought that went through my mind. How could I expect to change my reality if my beliefs were still trapped in insecurity? I began to replace those negative beliefs with others that empowered me, and little by little, my life began to transform. What would happen if you started to believe in your own power? But here's where self-control comes in. How can we change our beliefs if we don't have control over our own thoughts? The mind is like a wild horse. If you don't tame it, it will run in any direction, guided by fear, doubt, and insecurity. Learning. To control our thoughts is like learning to steer that horse where we really want to go. Have you ever wondered how many times your mind has taken you to places you didn't want to go? Self-control is not an easy task. It's not something you can master overnight, but it is the first step towards true freedom. I realized this in one of the most difficult moments of my life. I had lost something important to me, something that I thought would define my happiness. And as I sank into sadness, I began to notice how my thoughts dragged me further and further into a dark place. It was then that I decided I was not going to be a prisoner of my own mind. How many times have you felt that your thoughts control you instead of you controlling them? I decided at that moment that every time a negative thought appeared, I would confront it. I wouldn't let it go unnoticed. I wouldn't let it poison my day. I started practicing what I call the art of conscious self-control, and here's the key. It's not about repressing your emotions or thoughts, but about observing them, recognizing them, and then deciding what to do with them. It's like being the captain of a ship in the middle of a storm. You can't control the sea, but you can control the rudder. And the more I practiced, the more I realized that my external reality began to change. I no longer felt trapped by my emotions. I no longer saw myself as a victim of circumstances. I understood that the true magic was not in changing the outside world, but in changing what was happening inside me. Can you imagine what you could achieve if you learned to control your thoughts? Beliefs and self-control go hand in hand. You can't change one without working on the other. If you want to transform your life, you first have to transform what you believe about yourself. And to do that, you need to master your mind. What beliefs do you have today that are preventing you from moving forward? And more importantly, what beliefs could you adopt to start creating the life you truly desire? The power of self-control is not a power that is taught to us from a young age. In fact, we often grow up believing that our emotions and thoughts are something we can't control, that they are simply there. But that's not true. The mind is malleable. And when you learn to direct your thoughts, you discover that you can change your life in a way you never imagined. Do you dare to take the reins of your mind today? How to turn your desires into reality. I have always wondered why some desires seem so distant while others come true almost effortlessly. It's strange how life teaches us to dream but rarely shows us the way to make those dreams a reality. I grew up believing that my desires were like distant stars, bright but unattainable. Have you ever felt that way? As if what you really want is always one step beyond your reach, as if no matter how hard you try, something is always missing. I remember one particular night when I was walking under a sky full of stars. How can something so distant illuminate me? I asked myself while I felt that my desires were like those bright stars but so out of my control. I sat on a bench, looking up at the sky, and then something inside me changed. What if my desires weren't so far away? What if the distance I feel is just an illusion created by my own beliefs? That was the first moment I began to understand that our desires are not destined to remain on an unattainable plane, but that we have the power to bring them into our reality. How do we do that? That's the question we have all asked ourselves at some point. The answer, however, is not in the external world, but in the internal one. The first thing I understood was that our desires are a manifestation of our subconscious mind. It's no coincidence that you dream of something in particular. It's not a whim of destiny. Every desire that is born in you has a purpose, a reason for being. Have you stopped to think about why you desire what you desire? We often don't take the time to understand where our longings come from. We simply feel them, we chase them, but we don't understand them. That night, under the starry sky, I realized that if I wanted to turn my desires into reality, I first had to align them with my mind and my emotions. How do you do that? I asked myself over and over again. It was a slow process, but I discovered that everything begins with something as simple but as powerful as clarity. We cannot manifest what we don't understand. Do you really know what you want? It's easy to say that we want more success, more love, more happiness. But what does that mean to you? The first time I asked myself that question, I realized that I didn't have a clear answer. I wanted many things, but I hadn't defined what they really meant to me. So I started to dig deeper. I sat with myself and started writing. I wrote about my desires, not just in terms of what I wanted, but how it would make me feel. Have you taken the time to write your desires with that depth? Clarity is the key that opens the door to manifestation. But it's not enough to have clarity. It's necessary to truly believe. Do you really believe that you deserve what you desire? For a long time, I didn't believe it. And that was the reason why my desires remained just that, desires. I didn't believe I was worthy of them, and therefore, they never materialized. The second step was to change that belief. It wasn't easy. It took time, effort, and above all, patience. Do you realize how many times we sabotage ourselves simply because we don't believe we are enough? The magic of turning a desire into reality is not in asking, but in accepting, in believing that it is already yours. How can you manifest something if you don't believe you deserve it? I remember that after weeks of working on my beliefs, something inside me changed. I began to feel a kind of internal confidence, a certainty that what I wanted was not only possible, but that it was already on its way to me. Have you ever felt that certainty? It's as if the entire universe suddenly began to conspire in your favor. Opportunities began to appear. People I needed to meet crossed my path, and little by little, what once seemed impossible began to take shape. But here comes the most important part: action. You can have clarity about what you want. You can believe with all your heart that you deserve it, but if you don't take action, that desire will remain just an idea. How many times have you had such a strong desire but have done nothing to get closer to it? That happened to me too. For a long time, I stayed waiting for things to happen on their own, as if the simple fact of desiring them were enough, and it's not. Desires are like seeds. They need to be planted, watered, and cared for. Action is the water that nourishes them. Every small step we take towards our desires is a way of showing that we are committed to them. What step can you take today towards your dreams? It doesn't have to be a giant step. Sometimes the smallest steps are the ones that generate the biggest changes. Over time, I realized that the key to turning a desire into reality is to align your mind, your beliefs, and your actions. It's a process that requires patience. But when everything aligns, it's as if the whole world starts to move in your favor. Have you noticed that the world responds when you commit to your dreams, transforming your self-image from within? For many years, I lived under the shadow of a self-image that wasn't truly mine. It was a borrowed image, built by the opinions of others, by the expectations the world had placed on me. Have you ever felt trapped in a version of yourself that you don't recognize? I have. And it took me a long time to realize that the self-image I had accepted as my own was nothing more than a reflection of what others thought I should be. I remember as a child, I used to look at my reflection in the mirror and ask myself, who am I really? Not because I didn't know my name or my history, but because I felt there was something deeper, something I hadn't yet discovered. But as we grow, the inner noise gets louder. They tell us how we should be, what we should do, what we should feel, and slowly, without realizing it, we begin to believe that we are that image the world has painted for us. Have you ever wondered how many of the beliefs you have about yourself come from others? The first time I stopped to think about this was during one of those nights when silence seems louder than noise. I had been through a series of situations that made me question who I was and what I was doing with my life. I felt lost. Have you ever felt that way? As if the version of yourself you know is no longer enough, but you don't know how to transform it? It was in that search that I understood that self-image is not something static. It's not a fixed photo that accompanies us throughout life. Self-image is a reflection of our internal beliefs, and just like our beliefs, it can change. Can you imagine what you could achieve if you changed the way you see yourself? I realized that the key to transforming my self-image was not outside. It wasn't about how others saw me or how I wanted them to see me. True transformation comes from within, but how do you transform something so deeply ingrained? It was a question I asked myself over and over until I understood that the first step is to know yourself, to really know yourself, not the version you've created to fit in, but that part of you that has always been there, waiting to be discovered. Started doing a simple but powerful exercise. Every morning in front of the mirror, I would ask myself, who am I today? And at first the answers were vague, confusing, but over time, I began to notice that the answers no longer came from a place of insecurity, but from a place of certainty. What would happen if you looked in the mirror today and asked yourself the same thing? Little by little, I was building a new self-image. But this time, it was not based on the expectations of others. It was based on what I knew about myself, on what I had discovered within. And the most surprising thing of all is that when you change the way you see yourself, the world also changes the way it sees you. Have you noticed that? When you begin to see yourself with eyes of compassion, love, and strength, the world responds in the same way. One day, while talking to a close friend, he told me, "You look different. I don't know what it is, but there's something about you that has changed." And in that moment, I knew that the internal transformation I had started was beginning to be reflected externally. It wasn't just a superficial change. It wasn't that I looked physically different. It was that my energy, my presence had changed. Can you imagine how your life would change if you started to see yourself as the person you truly are and not as the one the world has led you to believe you are? But transforming your self-image is not a quick or simple process. It's not like changing clothes. It's a daily job, a commitment to yourself. There are days when you will feel full of doubts, when the mirror will seem to reflect the same person as always. How do you maintain consistency in those moments? I learned over time that the secret is in repetition. Just like a sculptor who, with each strike, shapes their work, we, with each thought, with each belief, shape our self-image. I remember one afternoon sitting in a park, watching a street artist carving a wooden figure. Each blow of his chisel was soft but constant, and over time, the wood began to take shape. I realized that it's the same with our self-image. Every thought you have about yourself is like a chisel blow. What figure are you sculpting with your daily thoughts? Transforming your self-image from within requires courage. It requires facing those thoughts you've carried for years, those that tell you that you're not enough, that you can't, that you don't deserve. But when you decide to change those thoughts, when you decide to sculpt a new version of yourself, something magical happens. You begin to live from a place of authenticity. Overcoming fear. Through thought, fear is one of those emotions that we all know, but few of us know how to manage. How many times have you felt that fear paralyzes you? I have felt it many times. Fear has the ability to become a shadow that seems to follow you everywhere, no matter how fast you try to escape. But what I learned through many falls and rises is that fear is not overcome by running from it, but by facing it head-on with the power of our thoughts. I remember one night when fear consumed me completely. I was alone in my room, looking at the ceiling, as if I could find an answer in those paint stains. Why was I so afraid? It was an inexplicable fear, a feeling that everything I tried was destined to fail. The problem is that when fear traps you, your thoughts start to work against you. You tell yourself, you can't. You're not strong enough. You won't make it. Have you ever repeated those words to yourself? That night, I decided to do something different. Instead of trying to extinguish the fear or ignore it, I looked at it head-on. I asked myself a question I had never asked before. Where does this fear come from? I realized that fear is nothing more than a mental construction, an idea that we have allowed to grow within us. Have you ever wondered how many of your fears are just that? An idea? The first step to overcoming fear is to understand that it is not real. Of course, we feel it as if it were a tangible threat, as if something bad were about to happen. But in reality, fear lives in our mind, fueled by negative thoughts and limiting beliefs. Can you imagine what you could do if you stopped feeding those thoughts? I realized that just as our thoughts can create fear, they can also destroy it. How? By changing the narrative. I started to challenge each of those fearful thoughts. If my mind told me, "You can't," I would reply, "Yes, I can." If it told me, "You're going to fail," I would reply, "Failure is part of the path, and I accept it." Little by little, I began to notice how those thoughts of fear lost their power. Have you ever tried talking to your fear this way? It's not easy. Fear is stubborn, but every time I faced it, I realized that it had less power over me. And that's how I understood that fear is not dissolved with courage, but with conscious thought. Fear is like a fog that clears when you decide to look beyond it. What thoughts fuel your fear? One of the most revealing experiences I had was when I faced one of my greatest fears, the fear of rejection. It was a fear that had accompanied me for years, preventing me from showing my authentic self to others. But one day, tired of living in the shadow of that fear, I decided to face it. I went to talk to someone I had admired for a long time, even though my mind kept telling me, "He's going to reject you." And even though that voice kept screaming inside me, my conscious thoughts were stronger. It doesn't matter if they reject you. What matters is that you dare. That was the first time I realized that fear only has the power we give it. The conversation didn't go as I expected, but what happened inside me was a triumph. I realized that even when things don't go as you imagine, the important thing is that you dare to try. What would you do if you knew that fear couldn't stop? Over time, I started to see fear differently. Instead of seeing it as an enemy, I began to see it as a teacher. Fear showed me the areas of my life where I needed to grow, where there were still shadows to be illuminated. Have you ever wondered what your fear is teaching you? Sometimes, fear is an invitation to look more closely at what we have been avoiding. As I learned to use my thoughts to overcome fear, I realized something even more powerful. Fear is a door to freedom. Every time we overcome one of our fears, we free ourselves a little more. It's as if every thought that challenges fear is a step towards our true freedom. What fear is holding you back today? And more importantly, what could you do to face it? Creating abundance from the subconscious. I always thought that abundance was something that existed out there, as if it were a prize reserved only for a few. Have you ever felt that way? As if life gave everything to a few while others watched from a distance, wishing for a little of that prosperity? I felt that for a long time until one day I understood that abundance is not something you should seek externally, but something you must cultivate from within. And when I understood that, my world changed completely. I remember one afternoon walking through a square, watching people pass by, each one immersed in their own universe. I wondered, why do some people seem to have it all while others struggle with every step? In that moment, something clicked inside me. I realized that abundance is not a matter of luck or privilege, but of mindset. Have you ever stopped to think about how your thoughts influence what you attract into your life? The subconscious is like a garden. What you sow in it will grow. If you plant thoughts of scarcity, of lack, your life will reflect exactly that. But if you instead decide to plant thoughts of abundance, of possibility, the universe begins to align so that those seeds can flourish. What thoughts have you been planting lately? I realized that for years I had been sowing the wrong seeds without realizing it. I fed thoughts of insufficiency. There's not enough for everyone, I would often tell myself. It's too difficult to succeed in this world, I would think, when things didn't go as I expected. Those thoughts, repeated over and over again, were shaping my reality. Has the same thing happened to you? One of the experiences that awakened me was a conversation with a friend who seemingly had a life full of success. He confessed that his secret was not money, not connections, not even luck. His real secret was his abundance mindset. He told me something I will never forget. Abundance is already within you, but you have to believe in it for it to manifest in your life. At first, those words seemed distant, almost unattainable to me. How could I believe in abundance when I felt that I was lacking so much? It was then that I began to make small changes in my way of thinking. I started with something as simple as being grateful every day. Instead of focusing on what I didn't have, I began to focus on what was already present in my life. And little by little, something inside me changed. Have you ever tried to be grateful for what you have, instead of worrying about what you lack? That was the first seed of abundance that I planted in my subconscious. But gratitude is not enough. It is also necessary to believe that you deserve abundance. This was perhaps the most difficult thing for me. For a long time, a small voice in my head told me, "You don't deserve it. You're not good enough." And with those thoughts, without realizing it, I was blocking the abundance that was already all around me. Have you ever told yourself that you don't deserve what you desire? If so, I want you to know that that belief is just an illusion, a barrier that you have created yourself. I started to work on my self-image. I started to visualize myself as someone worthy of receiving, someone capable of creating abundance in their life. At first, it was uncomfortable because my mind was not used to that kind of thought, but over time, those thoughts became a part of my subconscious. Can you imagine what you could achieve if you saw yourself as someone capable of receiving everything you desire? The most surprising thing of all was that when I started to change my mindset, opportunities began to appear. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a stroke of luck. It was the result of having aligned my thoughts with my desires. Abundance is not something that happens by accident. It is something you create from within, and it all starts with a change in mindset. Another key to creating abundance from the subconscious is to act as if you already have it. This doesn't mean you should live beyond your means, but that you should behave like someone who already has what they desire. How would you act if you knew that abundance was already a part of your life? When I started doing this, my life changed in ways I couldn't imagine. Acting from a place of abundance creates an energy that attracts more of the same. What are you attracting into your life with the way you act today? One of the greatest lessons I've learned on this journey is that abundance is not just about money or material possessions. True abundance is a mindset, a feeling of fullness that comes from knowing that no matter what happens outside, you already have everything you need within you. And when you live from that certainty, the external world responds accordingly. Breaking. Mental barriers. Sometimes the biggest barriers we face are not physical but mental. They are those invisible walls that we build without realizing it, which limit what we believe is possible. Have you ever felt trapped by a barrier that seemed insurmountable? I have too, and the most disconcerting thing is that many times those barriers are not outside, but inside. There was a stage in my life when I felt that everything I tried was met with a constant no. It was as if every effort crashed against an invisible wall. Why couldn't I move forward? I asked myself over and over. Everything seemed to be against me. But what I didn't understand then is that the real barrier was not the external world, but the beliefs I had adopted about what I could and could not do. Have you ever wondered if the limitations you feel are real or if you have just created them in your mind? One day, tired of feeling trapped, I decided to face that wall that wouldn't let me move forward. What is really stopping me? I asked myself, and the answer was not long in coming. I realized that I had been living under the weight of beliefs that did not belong to me, beliefs that told me that I wasn't enough, that I didn't have what it took to achieve what I wanted. How many times have you felt that you're not enough? It's incredible how we adopt those beliefs without questioning them, how we allow them to become the barriers that define our lives. But what I learned in that moment was that those barriers can be broken. They are not real. They are mental constructions that we can tear down if we are willing to face them. What mental barriers have you built without realizing it? The first barrier I broke was the fear of failure. I had always had that belief that failure was something I should avoid at all costs, as if failing was a reflection of my personal worth. But then something changed. I realized that failure is not the enemy, but the teacher. Every time we fail, we learn, and every time we learn, we grow. How many opportunities have you missed out on because of the fear of failure? Breaking that barrier was like freeing a part of me that had been captive for years. Suddenly, fear no longer stopped me. I started to see failure as part of the process, as one more step towards success. Can you imagine what you could achieve if you stopped fearing failure? Instead of seeing it as an end, I saw it as a new beginning, and that small mental transformation changed everything. The second barrier was what others would say. For a long time, I lived conditioned by the opinions of those around me. I worried too much about what others thought of me, to the point that I stopped being authentic. I stopped pursuing my own dreams. Have you ever felt that you live to meet the expectations of others? That is one of the most difficult barriers to break, because sometimes we aren't even aware that we have built it. One day, while talking to a mentor, he told me something I will never forget. The day you free yourself from what others think of you will be the day you truly begin to live. Those words resonated deeply within me. I realized that the only opinion that truly matters is the one I have of myself, and from that moment, I began to make decisions based on what I wanted, not on what others expected of me. Have you realized how much what others think of you influences you? And what would happen if you stopped giving so much power to those opinions? But there is another barrier that is perhaps the most powerful of all, the belief that we are not worthy of what we desire. This barrier was the most difficult for me to break for years. Even though I worked hard and dreamed big, there was a small voice in my mind that told me, "You don't deserve it." And that belief sabotaged me at the most crucial moments. Have you ever told yourself that you don't deserve what you desire? What I discovered was that worthiness is not something that others give you. It is something you give to yourself. It's not about meeting an external standard or getting someone else's approval. It's about recognizing your own value, knowing that you are enough just as you are, and that you deserve everything good that life has to offer you. When I understood this, something inside me changed. Can you imagine what would change in your life if you started to believe that you deserve everything you desire? Breaking those mental barriers is not easy. It's a process that requires courage because it involves looking at our deepest beliefs head-on and questioning them. But when we do, we discover that the only real limit is the one we have imposed on ourselves. What mental barriers are you ready to break today? Mental healing. Healing from the depths. The mind is a vast terrain, a space where our thoughts, memories, and emotions live. But it is also the place where the deepest wounds are hidden, those that we sometimes don't even know are there but that affect us day after day. Have you ever wondered why certain thoughts come back as if they were echoes that don't fade away? Those are the signs that in the deepest part of your being, there is something that needs to be healed. I remember the first time I realized this. It was a moment when I felt completely overwhelmed, as if all my emotions were out of control. Have you ever felt that way? As if an emotional storm were dragging you away and you couldn't do anything to stop it? I realized that it was not the present that was affecting me, but past wounds that I had never healed. I thought that time had erased them, but what it had really done was bury them in the deepest part of my mind. How many wounds have you buried, believing that they no longer affect you? That night, I sat alone in silence, trying to understand what I was feeling. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I dared to look inward. It was not easy. The wounds I carried inside were covered by layers of thoughts, beliefs, and fears that I had accumulated over the years. But I realized that if I didn't face them, I could never truly heal. Have you ever dared to look at your wounds head-on? Mental healing begins from that point, the moment you decide to stop running and start accepting. Accept that the pain is there, that the wounds exist, and that they need to be healed. It took me time to understand that I couldn't keep ignoring what was in the depths of my mind. The first step was to accept that those wounds did not define who I was, but that they did influence how I lived. How many times have you let your past pain influence your present? The curious thing is that once you decide to face those wounds, something begins to change. It's as if by shining a light on them, by recognizing them, they begin to lose the power they had over you. I realized that the key to healing was not to hide from my wounds, but to give them a voice, to allow them to be heard. And do you know how I did it? Through my thoughts. I began to transform the way I talked to myself. Instead of feeding thoughts of pain, of insufficiency, I began to talk to myself with compassion. Have you realized how you talk to yourself when things go wrong? I realized that I had been my own worst critic, punishing myself for wounds that I had not healed, for mistakes that I could no longer change. But little by little, I began to give myself permission to heal. The mind has an immense power to heal, but also to destroy. And many times, without realizing it, we use it against ourselves. Have you ever wondered if your thoughts are helping your healing or if they are perpetuating your pain? What I discovered is that the true process of mental healing begins when you decide to change those thoughts, when you stop punishing yourself and start forgiving yourself. One of the most revealing moments in my own healing process was when I realized that I couldn't keep holding on to the pain. Pain, although uncomfortable, had become familiar. I had become so used to living with it that the idea of letting it go scared me. Have you ever held on to pain because it's the only thing you know? But it was in that instant that I understood. That true freedom only comes when you decide to let go. Let go of the past. Let go of the wounds. Let go of the thoughts that tie you to a version of yourself that no longer serves you. I started to work on visualization. Every day, I would take a few minutes to close my eyes and imagine what my life would be like without those wounds, without those painful thoughts. At first, it was difficult. My mind resisted because it was used to that old pattern. But over time, I began to feel an inner peace that I had never experienced before. Can you imagine what your life would be like if you decided to let go of everything that has been hurting you? Healing from the depths doesn't mean that the pain disappears overnight. It's not a linear process. There are days when you will feel that you have taken giant steps, and others when it will seem that you are going backward. Have you ever felt that way? The important thing is to remember that every step, no matter how small, is a step towards your own healing. Throughout this process, I also learned the importance of forgiving, not only others, but myself. For a long time, I held on to guilt, believing that I deserved to feel bad for the mistakes I had made. But what I discovered is that forgiveness is the most liberating act we can offer, not only to others, but to ourselves. Have you ever forgiven yourself for the wounds you carry inside? How the subconscious attracts opportunities. Throughout my life, I have wondered if destiny is something that just happens, or if in some way we create it. Have you ever asked yourself that question? I used to believe that everything was written, that opportunities came to those with luck or connections. But over time, I realized something much deeper. We are the ones who attract opportunities, and the power to do so resides in our subconscious. I remember a time when it seemed that everything in my life was at a standstill. Doors didn't open, paths seemed to close before I could even take a step. Have you ever felt that way? As if no matter how hard you tried, nothing changed? It was frustrating. I tried so hard to find those opportunities, but everything seemed unattainable. One day, a friend told me something that changed the way I saw everything. Opportunities are not out there waiting for you. They are inside you, waiting for you to recognize them. At first, I didn't fully understand what he meant, but those words stayed with me. How could opportunities be inside me if what I was looking for was something external? Then I started to investigate, to delve into myself, and I discovered something fascinating. The subconscious is like a powerful magnet that attracts everything we truly believe in. And there was the secret. Opportunities weren't coming, because deep down, I didn't believe I deserved them. I didn't believe I was capable of achieving them. Have you ever stopped to think about what you really believe about yourself and what you deserve? It was then that I started to work on my subconscious. I realized that the beliefs I had about myself, many of them formed since childhood, were shaping my reality. Beliefs like I'm not good enough or I don't have what it takes were what was blocking the opportunities, not the external world. How many times have you told yourself stories that limit you without even realizing it? The first step was to change that internal narrative. I began to repeat a new story, one in which opportunities were within my reach, one in which I deserved everything good that life had to offer me. Can you imagine what would happen if you started to believe with all your being that you are worthy of every opportunity you desire? What happened next was surprising. Little by little, the doors that had once seemed closed began to open. It wasn't magic. It was the law of the subconscious mind in action. The subconscious has a unique way of working. It doesn't distinguish between what is true and what is fiction. It simply responds to what we feed it repeatedly. If we give it thoughts of scarcity, of fear, of doubt, the subconscious will give us back a reality full of obstacles. But if we instead feed it with thoughts of abundance, of possibility, the subconscious will begin to attract everything that aligns with that new reality into our life. What are you feeding your subconscious today? Once I understood this, I began to practice conscious visualization. Every morning before starting my day, I would take a few minutes to close my eyes and visualize what my life would be like if I were already surrounded by those opportunities I desired. I didn't just see them, I felt them. I felt the emotion, the gratitude of having them. Have you ever tried to visualize your dreams with such clarity that you can almost touch them? That small daily act began to transform my reality, because by visualizing those opportunities, my subconscious began to look for them in every corner, in every conversation, in every circumstance. And something magical happened. Opportunities began to appear, sometimes in unexpected ways, other times exactly as I had imagined them. Has it ever happened to you that when you change your mindset, the world seems to change with you? That's what I felt. It wasn't that the world had suddenly changed, it was me who had changed. By aligning my subconscious with what I truly desired, I began to attract the opportunities that had always been there, waiting to be known. But here's the trick. It's not enough to attract opportunities. You have to be willing to take them. Many times, opportunities come disguised as challenges, as uncertainty, as steps outside of our comfort zone, and that's where the second great lesson comes in: action. The subconscious can attract opportunities, but if we don't take action, if we are not willing to take that leap, those opportunities will vanish. Have you ever wondered how many opportunities you have missed out on because of the fear of the unknown? I understood this on the day that a great opportunity came to my door. One that I had always wanted, but that scared me deeply. In that moment, I felt the old fear return, that inner voice that told me, "You're not ready. What if you fail?" But instead of listening to that voice, I remembered everything I had learned. I knew that that opportunity had not come by chance. I knew that my subconscious had attracted it, because deep down, I was already ready. What would you do if you knew that you are already ready for all the opportunities that are to come? Cultivating inner confidence. Confidence. That word that seems so simple but has the power to transform everything around it. How many times have you felt that you lack self-confidence just when you need it most? It has happened to me, and what I have learned on this journey is that confidence is not something that is found outside or something that others give you. It is something that is cultivated from within. I remember a very specific moment in my life when a lack of confidence paralyzed me. I was faced with an opportunity that I had been waiting for a long time. But when the time came to take that decisive step, something inside me stopped. Why couldn't I move forward? The doubts began to fill my mind, one after another. What if I don't do it well? What if I'm not good enough? In a matter of seconds, what was an opportunity turned into a fear that completely blocked me. Have you ever felt that way? In that instant, I realized something very important. Confidence isn't born the moment you need it. It is cultivated much earlier, and that was my mistake. I had waited to be in front of the situation to seek confidence without realizing that, to have it at that instant, I should have worked on it long before, in the small moments, in the silence. How many times have we waited to face a challenge to seek the confidence that we should have already planted? Inner confidence is like a plant. If you don't water it, if you don't take care of it, it will not flourish when you need it most. I began to understand that to have true confidence in myself, I had to start recognizing my own worth, not based on external results, but on my own perception. But how do we do that in a world where everything seems to be centered on external validation? I realized that the first step to cultivating inner confidence is to accept our imperfection. It's not about always being perfect or having all the answers. It's about accepting ourselves just as we are, with our light and our shadows. For a long time, I believed that confidence came from being the best, from not making mistakes, from not failing. But what I discovered was the opposite. True confidence is born when you give yourself permission to be human, to make mistakes, to learn. Have you ever given yourself that permission? The second lesson I learned was that confidence is not built in the big moments, but in the small ones. It's in those daily decisions, in the internal conversations we have with ourselves, where the foundation of our confidence is formed. How do you talk to yourself when no one is listening? That question changed my life. I realized that in many moments I was my own worst saboteur. I told myself things I would never say to another person. You're not good enough. You'll never make it. And with those thoughts, day after day, I was destroying my self-confidence before it could even grow. So I began to change my internal dialogue. I started to be my own support, to treat myself with the same compassion that I would treat someone I love. Have you ever talked to yourself with true kindness? It's not easy, but it's necessary. I told myself that even if I failed, I would still be valuable, and little by little, that new narrative took deep roots within me. Another revealing moment was when I realized that confidence is not something you get by achieving things, but something you develop in the process. We often think that we will only have confidence when we achieve a certain success or when someone else recognizes it. But what I learned is that true confidence is born on the journey, while you work, while you face your fears, while you keep going despite the doubts. Can you imagine what your life would be like if you started to trust yourself before you had all the answers? And here is the most important thing. Confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward, despite it. For a long time, I believed that having confidence meant not having doubts or fears, but what I discovered is that even the most confident people have moments of uncertainty. The difference is that they have learned not to let that fear stop them. How many times have you let fear paralyze you? And what would happen if instead of seeing it as an enemy, you saw it as a teacher, as a sign that you are growing? The last thing I want to share with you is something that took me a long time to understand. Confidence is not static. It's a muscle that gets stronger with use. Every time you decide to act despite your doubts, every time you take that step, even if fear whispers in your ear, you are cultivating your confidence, and with each step, no matter how small, that muscle gets stronger. Are you willing to exercise your confidence today? The power of conscious visualization. I had heard many times about the power of the mind, about how our thoughts have the ability to shape our reality. But honestly, I had never paid too much attention to it. Has it happened to you? You hear those ideas and you think, it's just theory. It can't be that simple. Until one day, I experienced it firsthand. I remember it was during a complicated period of my life. Everything seemed to be out of my control. No matter how hard I tried, things didn't go as I expected. Have you ever felt like the universe is against you? It was in the middle of that storm when a friend told me about conscious visualization. He told me that to change my reality, I first had to change what I saw in my mind. If you can't imagine it, you won't be able to create it, he told me. And although at that moment I didn't fully understand, those words resonated deeply within me. So I decided to try it. At first it was difficult for me. I would sit in silence, close my eyes, and try to imagine a different life, one in which opportunities flowed, one in which things worked in my favor. But my mind, accustomed to problems, always returned to the same limiting thoughts. It's not that easy. What if it doesn't work? Has it happened to you? Sometimes our mind is so trapped in reality that it cannot see beyond what is in front of it. But I didn't give up. Day after day, I sat and practiced visualization. I did it every morning before starting my day. I imagined not only achieving what I wanted, but feeling the satisfaction, the gratitude, the joy that it would give me. Have you ever taken a moment to imagine how you would feel if you had already achieved what you want most? It's not just a matter of seeing the result. It's a matter of feeling it. What happened next was something I didn't expect. Little by little, my reality began to change. It wasn't overnight, nor was it a spectacular change, but I began to notice how small opportunities started to appear, how my attitude toward challenges changed, and how the universe responded to that new energy I was projecting. Have you ever felt that when you change internally, the external world also begins to change? Conscious visualization is not just a mental exercise. It is a bridge between what you dream and what you live. I realized that by visualizing what I wanted with clarity and emotion, I was training my mind to see opportunities where before I only saw problems. Can you imagine what you could achieve if you started visualizing your dreams every day? And here's the interesting thing. The power of visualization is not just in seeing the final destination, but in visualizing the process. I realized that for visualization to be truly effective, I couldn't limit myself to seeing only success. I also had to visualize the steps, the challenges, and how I would overcome them with confidence. It's in those details where the magic is. What steps do you visualize on your path to your goals? One afternoon, while meditating on all this, I realized something profound. The mind does not distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. For it, what you see in your mind has the same weight as what you experience in the physical world. Do you realize the power that has? If you can make your mind live the reality you want, then your subconscious will begin to guide you toward that reality. One day, I came across an opportunity that months before would have seemed impossible. But this time, something had changed in me. Instead of doubting, instead of letting fear hold me back, I remembered how I had visualized myself overcoming obstacles, moving forward with determination. I took that opportunity without hesitation, because in my mind, I had already lived that moment many times. How would you react if, when faced with a challenge, you felt that you had already overcome it before? That is the beauty of conscious visualization. It not only prepares you for success, but gives you the confidence that you are already living the process. But I don't want you to think that visualization is a magic formula that will save you from hard work. It's not like that. Visualization does not replace action. What it does is align you internally, prepare you mentally, so that when the time comes to act, you do it with security, with clarity, without doubts. Are you ready to start acting from that internal clarity? The power of conscious visualization is real. It's not a trick. It's not a deception. It is a profound tool, one that can transform not only the way you see the world, but the way you see yourself within it. How are you seeing yourself right now? Are you seeing yourself as someone who can achieve what they dream of? If not, then I invite you to start creating that new image in your mind today. Eliminating negative mental habits. There is a moment in life when you realize that what stops you most is not external circumstances, but the habits of your own mind. Have you ever noticed how certain thoughts come back again and again, like an endless cycle? I discovered it when, after repeated attempts to change my life, I realized that deep down something was keeping me tied to the same patterns. That was a difficult revelation to accept. The enemy was not outside, it was within me. It was an ordinary day, but one of those days where everything seems to go wrong. I found myself repeating the same thoughts I had had many times before. I'm not good enough. Why does this always happen to me? I don't have what it takes. It was as if my mind, instead of being my ally, had become my worst enemy. Have you ever felt that way? Trapped by your own thoughts? Then I asked myself a question that changed everything. How can I change my life if I keep feeding the same thoughts over and over again? Because that's what we do without realizing it. Every day, we repeat mental patterns that limit us, that sabotage us. And the worst part is that, being such ingrained habits, we are not even aware of them. The mind is like a river. If you don't direct it, it will continue to flow through the same channel, following the route it has always taken. And that channel, those waters that seem so uncontrollable, are our mental habits. But what if you decide to change the course of the river? What would happen if you stopped feeding those negative thoughts and started creating new paths? The first step I took was to recognize my negative mental habits. I began to pay attention to my internal dialogue, to how I talked to myself in difficult moments, and what I discovered was painful. A large part of my life had been guided by thoughts of self-criticism, of doubt, of fear. Have you ever listened to yourself carefully, not with the goal of judging yourself, but of understanding yourself? I did. And I realized that for years, I had been building walls with my own words, walls that prevented me from moving forward. What surprised me the most was that once I started to become aware of those thoughts, I could see how they influenced every decision I made. They were small, almost imperceptible, but they were there in every choice, in every path I decided not to take. Those limiting thoughts were pushing me toward fear, toward insecurity. How many times have you let those thoughts decide for you? But here's the most important thing. Those habits are not permanent. The mind is malleable, plastic, and what I have learned is that you can reprogram it. You can eliminate the negative habits that hold you back and replace them with new thoughts that push you forward. At first, it seemed impossible to me. How could I change something that had been with me for so long? But it was then that I understood that the key is not to fight against those thoughts, but to replace them. I began to work on conscious repetition. Every time a negative thought arose, I would observe it, but not let it stay. I would replace it with a positive one that reminded me that I was capable, that I could change my life. At first, it was difficult. Negative mental habits are like old friends, comfortable in their familiarity, but little by little with patience, I began to notice a change. Have you realized how you can choose your thoughts? One day, while meditating on all this, I realized something profound. We are not slaves to our thoughts. We are the creators of them. And if we have the power to create negative thoughts, we also have the power to create thoughts that free us, that empower us. What kind of thoughts have you been creating in your life? The next thing I did was a simple but powerful exercise, the act of rewriting my internal narrative. Every night before I went to sleep, I would take a few minutes to think about the moments of the day when I had allowed my negative thoughts to dominate, and then I would rewrite it. I would imagine myself facing those situations in a different way, with confidence, with calmness, with certainty. Have you taken the time to rewrite your internal story? Because believe me, what happens in our mind is what defines how we experience the external world. The last step was to forgive myself. To forgive myself for all those years when, without realizing it, I had allowed those negative habits to control me. Have you ever forgiven yourself for the thoughts that have limited you? Forgiveness is a door to freedom. I realized that I couldn't change my past, but I could change my present and my future, and that is what I did. From thoughts to actions, your subconscious as a guide. I have always wondered how much power our thoughts truly have over what we do. For a long time, I believed that thinking and acting were two separate things, as if there were a chasm between what you imagine and what ultimately happens in your life. But over time, I learned a truth that transformed the way I live. What you think consciously or unconsciously guides your every step. Have you ever stopped to think about how many of your daily actions are influenced by thoughts you are not even aware of? I remember a time in my life when, despite deeply desiring a change, I found myself stuck. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move forward. I asked myself questions like, why can't I move forward if I want it so badly? And then I understood that even though I consciously wanted something, my subconscious was telling a different story. Has it happened to you that what you say you want and what you end up doing seem to go in opposite directions? That's because the subconscious, that part of our mind that often goes unnoticed, is in control of most of our decisions, even if we don't notice it. One night, after one of those days where you feel that everything is on pause, I sat in silence and asked myself, what thoughts are guiding my actions? What I discovered was revealing. I realized that deep in my mind, there were beliefs that were sabotaging me. Beliefs like, I'm not ready, it's too difficult, maybe this isn't for me. And even though I consciously wanted to move forward, my subconscious was making decisions for me, keeping me in the same place. Have you ever stopped to listen to what you were really telling yourself in silence? It was in that moment that I understood that to transform my actions, I first had to transform my thoughts. But not just those thoughts that we can hear clearly, but also those that operate in the shadows, in the depths of our mind. How many of your thoughts are guiding your life without you realizing it? The first step I took was to make the unconscious conscious. I began to pay attention to my internal dialogue at key moments. those moments when I had to make a decision or take an important step. And every time I felt that something was holding me back, I would ask myself, what belief is at the root of this doubt? I began to realize that to go from thoughts to actions, I needed to reprogram my subconscious, to align it with my conscious desires. The subconscious mind is like an invisible guardian that decides whether you move forward or stay where you are. Have you ever felt that you want to do something, but something inside you is stopping you for no apparent reason? That's the subconscious guiding your every move, making decisions based on what it has learned from your past experiences. And what I understood is that if I wanted my actions to reflect what I truly desired, I had to give my subconscious new instructions. I began to practice guided visualization, not just as a superficial exercise, but as a way to talk directly to my subconscious. Every day before facing any challenge, I would take a few minutes to visualize myself achieving what I wanted. I didn't just see the result. I saw myself acting with confidence, taking the necessary steps. Have you seen yourself acting as the person you want to be? Not just achieving what you want, but being who you need to be to achieve it? That was one of the most powerful keys for me. And then something changed. I began to notice how, almost automatically, I made decisions that would have caused me doubt before. I felt a confidence that I had never felt before, not because everything was guaranteed, but because my subconscious mind was now aligned with my conscious thoughts. Can you imagine what you could achieve if your subconscious worked for you instead of against you? What surprised me the most was realizing that the subconscious doesn't need great effort to change. What it needs is consistency and repetition. Every time you give your mind new instructions, every time you visualize yourself acting from a place of success, you are creating new pathways in your subconscious, and those pathways will eventually become your automatic actions. How many times have you repeated negative thoughts without realizing that you are reinforcing patterns that hold you back? But the most important thing I discovered is that the subconscious doesn't work alone. It needs our conscious actions to reinforce those new pathways. You can't expect your mind to change if you are not willing to act. So I began to take small steps every day, aligning my thoughts and my actions. What small steps can you take today that will bring you closer to what you want? They don't have to be giant. They just have to be consistent. One day, after several months of working on my subconscious, I found myself in front of an opportunity that months ago would have paralyzed me with fear. But this time, without hesitation, I made the decision. It was then that I realized that the real change had happened. My mind was no longer sabotaging me. Can you imagine what it feels like to act without fear stopping you? It's a feeling of immense freedom, knowing that what you think and what you do are finally aligned. If this audiobook has inspired you, imagine what you can discover with many more. Do not let knowledge and spiritual growth stay here. Explore our full playlist and immerse yourself in more transformative wisdom. And if you really want to elevate your life with different points of view on spirituality, I invite you to visit my channel Chronicle of Knowledge, where you will find in-depth spiritual content to continue expanding your mind and your being. Do not miss the opportunity to continue transforming your reality. Take the next step now. Thank you very much.